Anger in Alcoholics, Anonymous. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger, discontent, and the violent excesses of temporary madness, which were not for us. They may be a doubtful luxury for normal people, but for alcoholics these things are poison. Anger is linked to the other three giants. It collaborates with fear in destruction and suffering. When it is linked to love, it gives us jealousy. When it joins duty, it gives us intolerance. But its preferred partner is fear. If fear is the residue and the anticipation of death that life carries within it, anger is the expression of a vital protest against it, as well as the attempt to expel that lethal discomfort by discharging it outward. Irritability is in a certain way opposed to initiative, and since it is the most primitive source of fearful reaction, not all irritable beings are aggressive, but aggressive ones are also irritable. In man, aggressiveness, due to the development of the cultural world and notions of value, manifests mainly in the form of the desire for power. Therefore, if there are many aggressive animals, in man it can be said that he is the only ambitious animal. Wanting not only to continue being as always, but to be more, that is, to have more power, to become a hoarder of power, is an essentially human trait. There are people who become hoarders of value or virtue. Values and ideals may vary, but what does not change is that eagerness to possess something, whether it be health or money, fame or purity, human knowledge, freedom or beauty. Because man desires and aspires to have so much, he becomes a victim of greater fears. Only man is capable of destroying himself and of killing. That desire for dominance, for affirmation and expansion of the self, constitutes the other fundamental ingredient of anger. What is missing for fear to arise? That one cannot feel anger without first having felt fear is obvious. Only when an obstacle appears, when something wounds our self and in some way limits or belittles it, that is, when we see ourselves somehow limited, hindered, or failed in our current purpose, do we feel the spark of anger ignite. The greater the offensive injury, the longer the angry reaction will have been held back, and the longer its manifestation may then last. Disguises of the red giant, thirst for justice. Not all notions of justice are tinged with anger. Rather, anger disguises itself as a sense of justice, and thus the excesses of revenge take on the name of reparative acts. People are ashamed of feeling fear, and, above all, of expressing it. They recognize that it is a bad companion against which one must struggle to earn social approval. But are they equally ashamed of their anger or of expressing it? They recognize that it is also a very poor counselor, and that it should be eradicated in order to be truly just. Very often we confess to being furious, and add that this state and the reactions derived from it are natural and justified by this or that offense. To take justice into our own hands, whoever acts this way is obeying, perhaps unknowingly, the sinister impulses of anger. Criticism. To criticize is to take a stand regarding something. A critical judgment is a decisive affirmation, and from this it follows that a critic is a judge, someone who decides about the value of something. For most people, however, it does not mean judging or deciding, but simply speaking badly and trying to devalue something. This shift is due to the fact that envy is often hidden beneath this attitude, and envy in turn carries a considerable load of anger within it. Not all criticism contains angry activity. There are criticisms that deserve respect, as they are fully just, constructive, and even well-intentioned. These meet 4 basic conditions. They are upright from a strictly human and understanding point of view. That is, guided by the real possibility of being objective. They are based on proven and provable facts. They are frank, directed only to the author, giving them the possibility of correction or defense. And they are constructive, indicating paths to improvement. All criticism can be directed toward others or toward oneself, and in the latter case, it may also obey, even unknowingly, the destructive and corrosive impulse of anger. Rage against oneself appears as self-contempt. I am worth nothing. I am a failure. It is almost to affirm, my life is not worth living. The attitude of systematic criticism is not only an angry attitude, but a premortal one. Its antidote is the creative attitude, which is accompanied by the awakening of love, which both anger and fear equally fear. Irony. Every ironist is an angry person who does not dare to openly express their discontent and resorts to the mask of false humor. Irony has a sadistic and perverse background. The angry person tries to humiliate their adversary through mockery and demonstrate intellectual superiority before others. They do this in a cowardly way, that is, hiding the offense, so that it is sometimes more perceived by bystanders or interlocutors than by the person concerned. This cowardice explains why irony is often exercised, especially in the absence of the target, where they cannot respond. Humor must not be confused with good humor. The former is bad humor that tries to imitate the latter. The proof is that, when closely examined, many great humorists turn out to be hypochondriacal, resentful beings, eaten away by envy, incapable of tolerating criticism or of performing a generous act. The humorist is, at heart, a failed, angry person who, on the basis of their fears and skepticism, constructs a structure of witty comments with the aim of earning others' praise by jokingly saying what others do not dare to say seriously. True good humor is different. It is an optimistic and benevolent attitude that leads one to see the joyful side of things and events, creating and spreading a cheerful laughter around. Pride. Some confuse it with pride in the positive sense, but it is actually different. While the truly self-satisfied person tries to conceal that defect, the arrogant person displays it openly. In their voice, gestures, mannerisms, somewhat provocative bearing, and disdainful attitude, this constant prior aggression toward the environment is manifested. When the arrogant person yields, they do not appreciate submission, because they become vain, for they are certain of their value and power, while inwardly they know they are only capable of representing them. It is not difficult to see that arrogance represents the final stage of a process of self-gratifications that always stands out as secondary to personal disappointment or frustration. If the arrogant person speaks loudly, it is because at some point they were silenced. This process of overcompensation for failure can lead not only to vanity, but to arrogance, but it always carries the unmistakable emotional tension, discomfort, and lack of peace that characterize the presence of anger. Special study of hatred. Hatred is anger preserved, an angry attitude that becomes layered and acquires special characteristics derived from the insufficient discharge of destructive impulses. These remain halted and stored in the hater for various reasons. Material impossibility of reaching the hated object, fear that, if attacked, it will react by inflicting greater harm, fear of moral or social sanction if the aggressive impulse is directly satisfied. Whatever the restraining factor, the truth is that the one who hates feels their action, paralyzed by the presence of something that stops and disturbs the free discharge of their anger, causing it to concentrate within. The effect of this tension is a progressive heating of the hater, who increasingly suffers the consequences of their hatred. Hatred is generated in us only when anger is not fully discharged or satisfied. This is why hatred toward another increases to the extent that the other is more similar to us. Thus, we understand that the deepest hatreds arise precisely among those who belong to closely related human circles. Hatred is the form of anger that most mixes and best blends with any type of emotional attitude, forming true emotional cocktails, the main example of which is so-called jealousy hatred. Hatreds, such as professional hatreds, can be condensed into three distinct motives: that of the rich against the poor, that of the old against the young, and that of the competent against the incompetent. We will limit ourselves to considering the last, due to its importance in determining behavior in the world of work. The hatred of the competent toward the incompetent professional is based on motives different from its reciprocal, and manifests in a different way. The competent professional should not feel hatred toward the incompetent, but compassion. This would be true if the current social organization allowed professional rank to strictly match one's aptitude for work. Unfortunately, the incompetent often occupy positions superior to those of the competent, and in such cases, the injury to the self arises, the initial condition of anger. How is such irregularity possible? Because job placement does not occur according to merit, but according to political or social influence, personal sympathies, or luck. Because in most cases there is no serious evaluation of each worker's performance to ensure they occupy the position they deserve. Because of rivalry among competent professionals, which leads them to prefer placing incompetent people in leadership positions to prevent equals from rising, and to maintain the satisfaction of feeling superior to those they direct. But once accustomed to their position through such complicity, these individuals are not inclined to remain mere figureheads, and when they try to impose their criteria, they further provoke the hatred of the competent, who must then recognize that they themselves enabled such a situation. This is the mechanism by which many intellectuals who criticize government leaders refuse to replace them when called to do so. The hatred of the incompetent toward the competent is deeper and more intense, as it arises not so much from the better position or greater prestige of the latter, but from the undeniable fact of their technical superiority. The incompetent can never aspire to truly be like the competent. They may try to replace them and appear equal. But faced with this inability, they resort to intrigue and resentment. It is not surprising, then, that the incompetent rationalize their hatred by claiming that the competent are vain, that they despise them, diminishing their motivation, or even that they persecute them, hiding behind professional superiority. Under such conditions, each adversary accumulates reasons for anger and uses increasingly questionable means in a struggle that becomes more and more hypocritical. Family hatreds. Their most important root lies in the obligation to love, as if it were possible to impose feelings on individuals whose only coincidence is finding themselves in the same family tree. No one can choose their siblings, parents, cousins, or nephews. They are given at birth for life. The current social organization, dictates that they must be treated with affection. Every family tends to function under an absolutist monarchical system. There is a head of the family who governs its destiny, and from this arise irreconcilable differences of opinion due to the prejudice of obligatory subordination of children to parents, nephews to uncles, younger siblings to older ones, etc. Hatred between in-laws and sons-in-law is less pronounced and has less expressive complexity, since it usually discharges itself more quickly. We have seen that hatred is, perhaps, of all passionate states, the one most inclined to preserve itself. Nevertheless, life implies change, and hatred that has a beginning must also have an end, even before this is imposed by the physical transformation of the one who harbors it. The outlets of hatred. Contempt. This is the most common, the easiest, and the least harmful. Through a slow and constant process of rationalization, we come to convince ourselves that the person we hate does not deserve our suffering, our concern, or our anger, revenge. Here we try to reaffirm our superiority over the hated object by inflicting upon it a harm or suffering that we judge equal to what it has caused us. Resentment. 3 conditions are required for hatred to give rise to resentment. First, that the probability of triumph over the hated person has been nurtured. Second, that it has been lost due to lack of courage. Third, that the subject, who feels a thirst without hope for revenge, perceives their own inferiority. Conciliatory forgiveness, the transition from a repulsive attitude to an attractive one, is favored by the fact that interpersonal interest is often reciprocal. How to tame anger. This gradual process of control, which allows us to harness its forces without suffering the devastating effects of its free action, is not easy. To use fear without cancelling anger, without being consumed, and to use love without becoming overly excited, is difficult to achieve, but not impossible. The struggle against bad temper. There is no doubt that bad temper is a sign of an irascible tendency. Almost always, the ill-tempered person is a pessimist, and deep down, a fearful individual who does not want to admit it. The main characteristic of bad temper is that it does not present itself as such. The person who has it admits to having a strong character, but does not recognize that it is a bad one, which is why it falls upon others to be careful not to provoke its display. The attitudes that define an ill-tempered character almost always try to explain their irritability as a sign of devotion to purer values. In every case, the person who says this fails to realize that their behavior represents a denial of what they are trying to affirm. How to fight bad temper. It is not enough to advise that someone who feels angry should look at themselves in the mirror and laugh at their face, count to 100, or remember that anger is one of the 7 deadly sins. All these methods are of little use in practice. The first step is to remember that bad temper may be the result of physical disturbances. Therefore, it is necessary to maintain a mentally hygienic attitude. This means, first of all, coming to terms with ourselves. Those who live at peace within themselves do not disturb others. It is worth remembering that violence, stubbornness, and intolerance are not signs of superiority, but of insecurity. We agree that anger blinds both sight and understanding, but it is important to remember that bad temper is almost always its latent form and develops against a background of anxiety. Hence the need to reach the dark depths of the self in order to eliminate the impurities that feed this form of aggressive fear. To know is to understand, and to understand is to begin to engage in dialogue. Then, aggressive gestures are transformed into firm and attentive movements. Hands will not strangle, but shape, and words will not insult, but will open the path toward creation, moving from burning fire to fruitful warmth, and from the wounding blow to the formative touch.